I am out of control, so I bought some. So now hopefully I'm more in control. Controller, if you will. If I've made it painfully obvious enough, this is a controller that you would find on any electric vehicle. This is the device that actually is connected to all of the other components, the battery, the motor, and tells it what to do based on the inputs from things like your throttle, like the key, any other parameters that it controls or monitors. It goes through this. For those of you not as familiar with electric bikes, consider this kind of like the equivalent of your ECU in your regular old ice bike or your carburetor in your really old ice bike. This still smells like fuel. So again, going back to the controller here, why would you want to replace this? Well, this provides a lot of added capability and a lot of added monitoring to the systems in such a way that you can be able to get the most out of the motor and out of the battery that you have in your existing bike. So what I'm hoping to achieve with this specific bike is a little bit more of a smoother throttle response. With this one specifically, when you're on the throttle and just let off ever so slightly, even just a little bit, it completely cuts off the motor and it can be very jarring. So I want something that's smoother, and I might even be able to get some additional top speed without having to change anything else like the battery. That's because with a controller such as this, which is a FarDriver 72300, probably the most common controller swap, it squeezes out every possible ounce of juice from the battery, from the motor, so that you can maximize this bike in its stock form, more or less, minus the controller, to its full potential. And we'll get into all the minutia of tuning this thing, or at least as much as I can fumble around with that later on. But first, we got to get this actually connected to everything. That means mounting it, wiring it up, and then finally getting this thing together and connected to the phone so that we can make those parameters. So without further ado, let's tear this thing down. Well, that was easy. Just a few bolts and plastic pieces to come off, and you get to see everything that's all involved here. And they organize it pretty nicely in here. We just have the battery with just the two connections right here. One goes to the charger, and then this goes to the controller. Then we have the controller itself. That's this big silver box right here. And then the entire wiring harness is neatly tucked up here with all of the connections. You might also notice that there are a few things here that are disconnected, and that is because this portion of the wiring harness is the brake safety switch. As you can see right there, basically what this does, disconnecting this, would just remove the safety cutoff switch. So if you're on the throttle at all and you so much as just look at the brakes, it won't shut the engine off. That way you can have both throttle and brake at the same time. But we're gonna have to dig a lot deeper into this, because not only are we replacing this box, but we have to redo all of the connections to it. Basically, this entire wiring harness is going to be replaced with a wiring harness that is provided with the FarDriver. And we're also gonna have to mount this thing, so it's going to go basically in the exact same spot here. This box should come out pretty easy, and then we can start disconnecting a few things. Actually, before we do all that, we want to make sure that we disconnect this. That is very important. That is the power from the battery to the controller. So that way we can make sure that there's no sparky sparks that are unintentional when we take all of this out. Now that we get that all out of the way and literally out of the bike, it's out with the old and in with the new. Now this might look pretty intimidating. There's a lot of wires, a lot of different colors, a lot of different connectors, but there's a lot of this that we're not gonna be using. This much can all go away, and really, all we have to deal with are just a few things right here. And not to mention that one of these is for the Bluetooth dongle, which is this guy right here, so we can just call that one good. So after all of that, we really just have to worry about these four. And with these four sections right here, we have these three, which is the throttle. We have 6 right here for the hall sensor, so that plugs into the motor. We got another set of 3 with a blue tip. This is our speed control, and even this you don't really need if you don't want it, but I want it. And finally, an orange wire right here, which is the keyed ignition switch to turn everything on and give the controller power. So ultimately not too bad. This is not as intimidating as it looks, but there are a few things that we do need to do for for this to make everything work. First of all, there's a lot of things here, like I said, that is not being used, and you don't have to do anything with these, but I just hate having wires that aren't being used, and I want to clean things up as much as possible. So I'm actually going to de-pin every single one of these and just take it out of the wiring harness entirely. And then for the wires we're actually going to be using, these are just generic connectors, and they don't necessarily line up with the connectors on the mototech. So on both the mototech components and this wiring harness, we actually need to take these out, de-pin them, and then re-pin them with new connectors so that everything lines up exactly the way it's supposed to. And even more so because we're going to be adding some new components like this throttle, which actually has a voltage display rather than that stupid bar graph. And these connections definitely don't line up with what we have here. So all the more reason to make sure that these connections are redone, cleaned up, and actually connect together. So now that brings us to the tedious part, all of the de-pinning, the re-pinning, the connections, the crimping, all of that good stuff. So with that in mind, cue the montage.
Wires tangled in my hand, linking circuits I pretend I understand. Cut and strip a double check. FarDriver will help this mototech. Heat shrink covers tight and clean. Crimping strong, I'm keen. Plug connectors, feel the flow. Now to put this FarDriver in and go. Wires of all colors, it's so bright. Red, green, blue, gray, black, and white. Do you think anyone will notice this is AI? It's for this montage, now bye-bye.
See, that wasn't so bad. Everything is so much easier when you have a montage. Now everything is connected the way it's supposed to, and I have everything roughly fitted in here. We'll obviously put everything where it's supposed to, but for now I just want to make sure that all of the connections are good and that when I plug this thing into the battery, ultimately it turns on and we can get through the controller setup and everything like that to make sure that the motor turns, that all of the connections are made, there's no smoke and fire coming out of it, and that everything's all good. Then we'll button this up and actually ride it. Now I'm not going to go wire by wire and how everything was connected because that's incredibly tedious, and there are a lot of videos out there that do a better explanation than I would ever do. In fact, I referenced a lot of these videos when doing this myself, so I will link one of those up top there that I referenced a few times, and it was very helpful. But here is the FarDriver itself. On this side we have 5 big wires right here. On either end is the negative and positive for the battery. In the middle here we got some blue, green, and yellow wires. These are our phase wires, and these come from the motor directly. Then on the other side here we have the wiring harness that we cleaned up that was connected into the FarDriver and has all of our connections to the other auxiliary inputs. This one right here is a 5-pin. This also goes to the motor. These are our Hall sensors. We have the Bluetooth dongle, of course. We did not touch anything there. And then we have another 5-pin which actually goes to our throttle. The reason for the 5-pin for the throttle instead of 3-pin is because this is not just a throttle, this is actually the key switch and the voltage display. You also notice this is a thumb throttle now instead of a twist throttle. I thought I'd give that a try in case I don't like it though. I do have an identical twist throttle. And then up top we finally have a 3-pin right here. These are our different throttle positions and speed modes. So I decided to just use the existing one that the mototech uses. Even though this is a dial, it really is just a 3-position switch. As you can see, there are 3 wires coming out for low, middle, and high. And so I connected those up to what the FarDriver has as low, middle, and high. Now for the fun part, we gotta actually make the power connection. This is the controller, this is the battery, and we're probably gonna get a spark here, but no need to worry. All good. Well, nothing is smoking or on fire, so we're off to a great start. Now to actually see whether or not the connections that I made were the correct ones. So we're gonna put the key in here, and once we flip this switch, everything should come on. This should start beeping at me, and we should start to see voltage on the display. Hooray! 49.7 volts on the voltmeter, and we got the controller beeping at me, but that is because we haven't connected anything and started the auto learn, so let's do that next. Okay, now for the fun part, the confusing part, if I'm honest. This actually took a little bit of time for me to grasp the whole process, but I'm gonna do it for the first time with you at the same time. Phone is gonna be on the side here, so you see exactly what I see as we go through it. It's gonna ask to verify and register. So you gotta put in either a phone number or an email. So I'm gonna do that. So I got the registration code. Now it shows me this home screen. Now what I have to do is go to this Bluetooth icon at the bottom. It says COM for communication. Let's flip this on so that it actually can talk to it and it has power. It's gonna probably beep at me until I connect. But we have the UON-Q FO, whatever that is, on there. We're gonna hit connect. Maybe you have to bound it. Looks like it liked that. Well, it's still beeping, but maybe we can go into parameters. So before we do auto learn and everything like that, we have to actually tell the controller what it's connected to, because this is a universal controller. It doesn't know what kind of battery you have. It doesn't know what kind of motor you have. So we have to tell it a few things. So we're gonna have the rated voltage here. So we have a 48 volt. Okay, so if we click the Pro NBLE, which I think is Pro enabled, we have a lot more parameters here. This looks a lot more familiar from what I've seen on posts online. The max line current and the max phase current, we wanna make sure that we change that. So with this, we wanna put it in a safe amperage. Basically what that means is how much juice are we pushing into the motor to give it power. Normally this bike is rated at 1600 watts, and that wattage comes from the voltage times the amperage. So the voltage is the battery pack, so that's 48 volts. And then the controller, the old one at least, drew about 35 amps. This can push a little bit more and the motor can handle a little bit more, but I just want to go a little bit higher. You can change this later, but for the sake of auto learn, I think it's safe to do 50. And then there's max phase current, the max torque, more or less. People say that this motor can handle about 5,000 watts. So with a 48 volt, I think it will stick to about 100 amps. That's safe. Okay, final parameter before we can put this in auto learn, and hopefully this thing stops beeping at me, which is low volt protect. This is how low the voltage can go before the controller shuts itself off. And so this battery is a 48 volt, and because of that, the safest voltage to drop down to is typically about 39, so we'll put in 39 there. All right, I think we're ready to do the auto learn.
He was not ready. He will find out that there was one critical step missed.
So we're gonna go to the graph tab. We're gonna tap auto learn. Damn it, this is not working.
A few moments later.
Okay, welcome back. It has been a few frustrating minutes, but look, it's making a different noise. This is a better noise. So the issue we were having, it was beeping 5 times because 5 beeps is low voltage. It thought it had 72 volts and the low voltage protect was 60, but this is only showing 50 at the moment. And so I just had to hit save on the data right here by hitting save. Save, a little bit of a different beep there, and now it's doing the beep, 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 beep. That means it's ready for auto learn. We're gonna go back to the graph here, and you can see now the auto learn in the very center has a green check mark where it had a red X. Now it's ready to go. Now I have this on the stand and the wheel is free moving. So we have it in self-learning status. We're gonna hit enter, and then we're gonna go wide open. And just hold it there. Now it's ramping down. It's just going through all the RPM, all the speed, all the everything, just learning everything, I hope. Whoa, the inertia there. So now it's going backwards. Okay, ramp down. It should beep at me. Now we're done. Okay, so once you actually know what you're doing, it's pretty easy. If we just turn this off, and then turn this back on, it's not gonna freak out at me. And now I think if we just hit the throttle like normal, whoa, wow. So we're gonna have to change some settings in here for sure. Okay, so I'm going back into the Pro enable mode, and let's just see where everything is at. Pole pairs is 1. That one, it should be 5. I need to change the max line current back. That's probably why it was so punchy. Temp sensor is another one, and I know for a fact this one does not have a temp sensor. So I'm gonna make that none. Motor direction. Oh, it's actually going in reverse. Ha, I didn't realize that. So motor direction, we're gonna change that to 0 and hit save. So that's just a few of the short settings that I know off the top of my head, at least the important ones. There's a lot more, obviously, as you can see right here, but I will get back to you and take a look at some of these settings and see which ones are best suited for this current setup, as well as put everything back together. Now that I know everything works, I can actually put the controller back in where it's supposed to, button everything up, and have it rideable. So let's do that. Last night we did just that. We got everything together. And finish it off with some nice pink grips to go with the pink everything. So right off the bat, the throttle is so smooth. Look at this. I can maintain a small speed right here just by feathering it just ever so slightly. I would never have been able to do that with the stock controller. Never. You can hear the motor whirring so much faster now. Hopefully it's not too fast, although I think in the settings that I have it, which I haven't changed anything since yesterday, it seems like those settings are pretty conservative compared to what others have done. I've seen a lot of people post their parameters, and some people really push the limit when it comes to these, but I want to make sure that this is more or less in a comfortable state where it's not overheating and that the components are well within any kind of reasonable range. Oh. So if I'm going along and I just barely touch the throttle, having already been going, it seems a little crunchy. That's going to be the other part of this, is the troubleshooting. So many things you can tweak, but now the process is going to be figuring out which one of those things to tweak based on what I have currently. So right now, I think the only issue, honestly, is just a slightly crunchy RPM at partial throttle, and maybe a few things in terms of like speed ramp up and RPM percentage, but otherwise it's pretty awesome as it is. You know, I also gotta say that as someone who hates doing electronic work on motorcycles, this was really not that bad at all. When you're only dealing with a small wiring harness, just a couple of little components, and everything's new and fresh and you know exactly where things go, it's so much easier and kind of fun, actually. And even though we got everything back together and looking clean and fresh, that's just the start. Now comes the tuning part. So I'm gonna play around with that.